mean that it does not pay taxes.
This hearing on Apple's corporate tax policy will continue, expected to go until about 1 p.m. Eastern. Our coverage continues live online at cspan.org. But here on C-SPAN, we're going to the U.S. House next. You can see at the Capitol, all the flags around the U.S. Capitol have been ordered at half-staff by leadership in the House and Senate. We expect moments of silence both in the Senate chamber and the House this afternoon for the victims of the Oklahoma tornadoes. President Obama spoke on that earlier, and you can see his comments in our video library at cspan.org. The House coming in next, 6 bills on the agenda today, several dealing with veterans issues. Votes mid-afternoon. Live coverage now here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Pastor Mark Turner, South Valley Community Church, Gilroy, California.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, what an incredible honor it must be for these men and women gathered in this chamber today to represent the entire population of this country. I pray that they would not only feel the magnitude of this responsibility, but that you would give them the strength of character to carry out that responsibility in an honorable and Christ-like way. I pray, too, for the guardians of freedom on duty today all around the globe, the men and women of our armed forces. May you sustain them and keep them safe. May we as a nation never forget the tremendous sacrifice they have made on our behalf to ensure our freedom and democracy. May it be upon these members of this House that the lantern of hope and the light of liberty continue to burn bright in this land we call America. And finally, Lord, it's with heavy hearts that we stand here today, each one of us assembled in this chamber. Pray for the families in Oklahoma who have been affected by the devastating tornado that struck yesterday. Comfort those who have lost loved ones. Strengthen rescue workers and emergency personnel, and may neighbor reach out to neighbor to assist in the healing and rebuilding process. As the eyes of the world are upon the residents of Oklahoma, let them demonstrate dependence upon you and help them to display the resilience, the resolve, and the American spirit that made their state and this nation so great. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated.
Without objection, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to introduce Pastor Mark Turner, South Valley Community Church in Gilroy, California, as our guest who delivered this morning's opening prayer. Over a decade ago, Pastor Turner left his career to answer a higher calling to serve his fellow persons in the ministry. In serving others, Pastor Turner has become a respected leader in our community, making a difference in people's everyday lives. Working with local partners and businesses, Pastor Turner and hundreds of volunteers serve our community through outreach projects that feed children, seniors, and underprivileged residents. They help local children through programs that encourage them to be active and strive for success success. They bring compassionate and caring services to people in need. Answering a call to serve something larger than oneself is a trait we deeply admire and value as Americans. And so it is a pleasure to welcome Pastor Turner to our nation's capital today and to thank him for his service to our community and our country. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair will entertain 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio?
I stand with consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, our hearts go out today to those in Oklahoma who are suffering as a result of this storm. I've asked that the flags here in the Capitol complex be lowered to half-staff in honor of the victims of this terrible tragedy. Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, this House is going to continue to be focused on the issue of jobs. It's the #1 issue of concern to our fellow citizens, and we're going to continue to be focused on the things that get in the way of job creation in our country. Most notably this week, we'll work on trying to get the Keystone Pipeline approved. That will create some 20,000 direct jobs and over 100,000 indirect jobs. And trying to make sure that those who have student loans won't see their interest rates double. That'll be the work of the House this week. But in addition to that, we have a responsibility to the American people to provide oversight of the executive branch. And I think Americans understand, and my colleagues understand, that the American people deserve the truth. And whether it's Benghazi, whether it's the IRS, whether it's the Justice Department investigating journalists, the Congress of the United States and the American people need to know what the truth is to hold this administration accountable. Those of us in public office understand that our job is to serve the American people, not the other way around. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, over the past few weeks, newspapers in my district in Pennsylvania have reported that local housing authorities are facing a quote-unquote nightmare due to sequestration cuts in HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Speaker, fewer people are going to be able to access housing as a result of this Congress's nightmare policies. In Northampton County, Pennsylvania alone, 85 people are going to have to leave the Section 8 voucher program through turnover, or there will be evictions. In Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, 900 people will be removed from the program's waiting list. Our social safety net is disappearing. And what happens if these people fall into homelessness? According to HUD, the annual cost of a shelter bed funded by the Emergency Shelter Grants Program is approximately $8,067 more than the average annual cost of a Section 8 voucher. This Congress is being penny-wise and pound-foolish. With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the EOD community lost one of its best and brightest. Sergeant First Class Jeffrey Baker was killed a week ago today in an IED explosion that killed 4 of his fellow soldiers and injured multiple others. Sergeant First Class Baker was assigned to the 766th EOD Company out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, and was serving in Sanjureh, Afghanistan at the time of his death. EOD soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are the preeminent explosive experts in our armed forces. Our joint EOD forces lead the fight against the use of IEDs and protect their fellow service members and our interests both at home and abroad. Too often, the lives of these brave men and women are claimed by the very devices they're trained to neutralize. Sergeant First Class Baker gave his life along with 4 of his fellow soldiers in defense of our freedoms. It's important that we honor their sacrifice and the sacrifices of those who came before them. Next week, as the nation honors the veterans who have given their lives for this country, it's important that we take time to recognize the risk our troops take on our behalf every day and the need to support our veterans and their families. Jeffrey Baker was from Hesperia, California, was just 29 years old. He's survived by his wife and his young daughter. My thoughts and prayers are with Jeffrey's entire family, the families of his fellow soldiers who were killed, and the soldiers recovering from the blast. God bless our armed forces and God bless America. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the House Democrats Make It in America Working Group, I was pleased to attend a ceremony yesterday welcoming Longaberger Pottery to Niagara Ceramics Corporation in Buffalo. In 2005, Longaberger moved its production line to China. Its return will create 22 American jobs. Under CEO Tammy Longaberger, this fifth-generation family business manufactures in the true American artisan tradition. This story is further evidence that we are approaching what the writer Charles Fishman calls the insourcing boom. American companies are reconsidering their decisions to move operations overseas. The issues of rising transportation costs, quality control, and the productivity of American workers is driving this trend. Congress should be working to ensure the new trend becomes a sustainable, large-scale movement, and austerity is exactly the wrong response. We should be investing in our infrastructure in education and science. We should adopt the House Democrats' Make It in America agenda, including legislation that replaces tax breaks for moving jobs overseas with incentives for bringing them home. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to announce legislation I introduced that will designate the post office in Marietta, Ohio as the Lance Corporal Joshua C. Taylor Memorial Post Office Building. Lance Corporal Joshua Taylor is a true American hero who lost his life on March 18th in an explosion during a training exercise at the Hawthorne Army Depot in Nevada. From an early age, Josh had dreamed of serving his country and becoming a Marine. He entered the Marine Corps upon graduating from Marietta High School in 2010. After basic training, Josh was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and specialized in mortar weaponry. He honorably served tours of duty in Afghanistan and Kuwait. In addition to being a dedicated Marine, Josh was an exceptional individual. He will be remembered for his gentle spirit, unfailing love, and his love for his family. Dedicating the Marietta Post Office for Josh Taylor serves as a small tribute to honor and remember the life of a remarkable young man and the sacrifices he made for America. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, our economy is improving. The national debt is going down faster than expected, and yet sequestration is still in effect and causing real and long-reaching harm in our communities. Republicans appear prepared to sacrifice our country's economic growth, sacrifice job creation in favor of sequester cuts. What happened to the members on the other side all the last term asking, where are the jobs? Now I'm asking, where are the jobs? Mr. Speaker, the sequester is slashing jobs, cutting education, and starving research. All this happens while my counterparts feel comfortable to stand idly by, and instead of appointing conferees to work out the differences between the House and Senate budget proposals and coming up with a plan that grows the economy and responsibly reduces the deficit. The American people need Congress to act in a big way, and we need to act now. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my colleague who just spoke, I say she's going to have an opportunity with voting on the Keystone XL bill to address the jobs issue this week. But let me talk about this most recent IRS scandal. I have a local attorney well-respected named Tad Armstrong, who founded the Constitution study group called Earn It, Learn It, or Lose It. He applied for tax-exempt status in August of 2010. In October 2010, Cincinnati headquarters called with a lot of questions, and it wasn't until October 2011 that he received an 11-page rejection letter. He hired an accountant to try to appeal, and he told the accountant that his appeal was probably denied because he was teaching about the Constitution. She laughed at that. But after this most recent IRS story broke, she called back and in quotations said, "My goodness, you are right." I quote Tad in saying, "Here you have Jay Carney saying the President is a staunch defender of the First Amendment. I can't help but be reminded several times the President saying the Constitution is outdated and gets in his way." I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, in 1962, President Kennedy established Peace Officers Memorial Day to honor the sacrifices made by officers who died in the line of duty. Last week, during this year's Peace Officers Memorial Day, I was privileged to meet Elisa and Miguel Garcia, who recently lost their firstborn son, El Paso police officer Angel David Garcia. It was Officer Garcia's lifelong dream to serve our nation and the city of El Paso, a dream he pursued with enthusiasm and dedication. Tragically, only 9 months after he joined the force, Officer Garcia was killed while on patrol this past December. Officer Garcia dedicated his life to making El Paso and our nation a better and a safer place. He was both a Marine reservist and a patrol officer with the El Paso Police Department, and he was a loving older brother to his sister Allison and to his brother Mickey. Angel Garcia's selfless service serves as an example to all of us. On behalf of all El Pasoans, I thank Officer Garcia and all those who serve our communities in law enforcement. Our community is proud to remember him as one of our finest. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Kansas seek recognition?
I'd ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
The President seems to be getting a lot of information from the news rather than from his own administration lately. He says he was unaware of the IRS targeting conservatives, unaware of the Department of Justice seizing reporters' phone records, and unaware of the HHS Secretary fundraising for Obamacare until he saw it on the news. The next story the President should read will be about our bipartisan solution to create jobs and greater energy security for America, the Keystone XL pipeline. It really is incomprehensible that the President, after 1,700 days, would continue to stand in the way of the largest shovel-ready project in this country. It's really this simple. More American energy means more American jobs. With millions of hardworking Americans out of work, gas prices skyrocketing, and China outcompeting the United States for access to Canada's oil supply, we need the Keystone Pipeline. It's time to put hardworking American families ahead of politics and focus on real solutions. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of my constituents in the state of Hawaii as we all express our deepest condolences to those who've been impacted by the horrific tornado that hit Oklahoma yesterday. The destruction has been absolutely heartbreaking, and there really are no words that can adequately provide comfort during a time like this. However, it's important for all of us to send a message of solidarity to those who've lost their loved ones, who've lost their children, lost their homes, and those who are still searching for their children, family, and friends in the rubble. Know that your country stands with you, your country grieves with you, and we're committed to doing what it takes to make sure that you have the support to rebuild. The strength of our nation lies in our unity, especially in these times of great need. Now is the time, as we go about our business here in the People's House, where we must stand as one, united to help our brothers and sisters in Oklahoma, provide with them assistance, prayers, and support as their recovery and rebuilding process begins. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Does the gentlewoman seek unanimous consent?
Unanimous consent, please.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today because I want to get Americans back to work. You know, when I was a little girl on the farm in Kettle Falls, Washington, my parents used to tell me, Kathy, life isn't always fair. But you see, the difference was the things that weren't fair were outside of my control. Years later, we have a president who likes to talk a lot about fairness. But what he fails to mention is what isn't fair. It isn't fair that this administration continues to make life harder for Americans all across this country, whether it's paying the bills at the end of the month, higher health care costs, higher gas prices, an economy that's struggling with the smallest workforce participation rate since 1979. It is unfair for Washington to continue down a path that isn't working. This week we're voting to clear the way for the Keystone Pipeline. It will create at least 20,000 new jobs from construction alone. It's just one piece of a true all-of-the-above energy plan. Keystone will put people back to work immediately while reducing our dependence on foreign oil and adding billions of dollars to our economy. It's time for the President to stop talking about fairness and actually start supporting it. And he can start by signing the Keystone Project into law and get Americans to work all across this country. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to call attention to the growing threats that climate change poses to public health. Increasingly, severe and frequent weather events and heat waves not only threaten people's health and safety, but also jeopardize our food crop production and the availability of clean drinking water. Food-borne illnesses, asthma, cardiovascular disease are expected to worsen in a changing climate. Despite these anticipated impacts, however, most American health professionals do not have the tools they need to prepare for the changing needs of their patients. And climate change's threats to human health will only escalate with every day that we fail to take action. That's why last week I reintroduced the Climate Change Health Protection and Promotion Act, which will help health professionals prepare for and respond to the public health impacts of climate change. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to turn a blind eye to the impacts of climate change, especially when it comes to the health of our friends, our neighbors, and our families. I hope we can work together to pass this and other common sense measures to address the critical issue of changes to our climate. I yield back the House.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, some people and companies are getting rich off of Medicare. Washington Post columnist Charles Lane wrote about the power wheelchair suppliers who are reimbursed as much as $5,000 for a basic chair that costs them $700 and sells at ordinary retail for $2,500. In addition, hospitals are charging wildly varying prices for the same procedures. George Washington University Hospital averages $115,000 for a patient on a ventilator, while Providence Hospital in the same city averages $53,000 for the same service. In St. Augustine, Florida, one hospital typically billed $40,000 to remove a gallbladder using minimally invasive surgery, whereas one hospital in Orange Park, Florida, charged $91,000. In one hospital in Dallas, the average bill for treating ordinary pneumonia was $14,610, while another charged $48,000. I do not want to see one poor person denied any necessary medical treatment. However, we should not treat Medicare and Medicaid as wholly and untouchable and allow many hospitals, medical providers, and suppliers to get filthy rich off of government medicine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to once again urge House leadership and the majority party in the House to refocus on what should be our top priority, jobs and the long-term economic stability of our nation. Each day we report to our constituents that economic growth and putting Americans back to work is job one in Congress. Yet very rarely does our agenda reflect that priority in this House. In fact, the request to name conferees to complete the budget process to grow jobs and grow the economy doesn't get heeded over and over again. We are putting more and more people to work each month, but I have no doubt that we can do better. As I talk to neighbors and friends back home, unemployment remains their top concern. Instead, many in this chamber are plotting to take the debt ceiling hostage. We already know the dire consequences from that act. The bottom line is this: jobs and economic growth are our constituents' top concern, and they should be ours as well. We can and must do better. Let's put America to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and with permission to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great joy today that I have shadowing me today a girl named Desiree, and she is with me as a foster child. It was one of the greatest honors of my life to serve as a foster mother to 23 great kids. May is Foster Parent Month. There are 400,000 children in the United States who need a foster parent. We need more foster parents. She and I have been talking about the news of the day so far. We talked about the tragedy in Oklahoma and how our former colleague, now Governor Mary Fallin, is working so beautifully together with the staff in Oklahoma to meet the needs of the tragedy that's occurring. We talked about gas prices being $4.30 a gallon and how building the Keystone Pipeline will provide new jobs. Foster children need love. They need stability. They need to be a part of the fabric of this nation. Let's make them a priority in this country. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To me, what has been more shocking than the sequester itself has been the response to it, or lack thereof, on the part of House leadership. Are they listening to those on our streets and neighborhoods, or maybe the country is simply numbed by its repugnance of this Congress and the last? The sequester harms the American people, particularly the middle class and our children. My district in Queens, New York, is decidedly and truly middle class. And everyday constituents tell me how the sequester is hurting their families and their future. It will cost America over 750,000 jobs this year, including police, firefighters, public defenders, and border agents. We need to come to a compromise on a real spending plan that will increase revenue rather than slashing critical programs. The American people need us to speak up for our priorities and our values. The silence is disturbing. The sequester is not okay. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the deliberate targeting of conservative groups by the IRS is inexcusable and raises serious red flags about the agency's abuse of power. Mr. Speaker, what we see here is an institutional arrogance within the IRS. The American people should be able to trust that the agency responsible for collecting their hard-earned tax dollars will not discriminate against them based on their values or political views. And while the Obama administration would have us believe that the IRS's targeting of conservative groups was the result of an increase in the number of nonprofit applications, the data clearly reveals this to be simply untrue. As if the targeting of conservative groups wasn't bad enough, the IRS will soon also become the enforcer of Obamacare, with the very same person previously in charge of the tax-exempt division at the IRS now in charge of the Obamacare Enforcement Division. Mr. Speaker, we need accountability from this agency and this administration. The American people demand it, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, for the first time in recent history, Congress has a real opportunity to pass comprehensive legislation to fix our broken immigration system. Legislation being backed by a bipartisan group of senators has done what many previous proposals have failed to do, and that is to gain broad support and balance the needs of all of the interests of our country. I've been working closely with members on both sides of the aisle, in the House and in the Senate, agricultural organizations and farm workers, to make sure that the concerns of California agricultural communities are met. The Senate plan provides a legal and stable workforce for agricultural and critical protections for those who work very hard every day to put safe, healthy foods on our nation's dinner table. Without these provisions, it would have been a deal-breaker for our valley. Naysayers might say it's time to wait, but that's motivated simply by political interests, not reality. It's time for immigration reform now. It's time for the House to act and come together. It's time to pass this bipartisan effort to fix America's broken immigration system. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been almost 5 years since the application to build the Keystone XL pipeline was filed. It's also been almost 5 years that Americans have been waiting for the jobs and energy security Keystone would provide. How much longer will President Obama make us wait? American families expect our government to pursue the least expensive, most reliable domestic energy. Jobless Americans expect that their president won't stand in the way of economic relief. But on both fronts, President Obama's choice to cede to environmental special interests and block the Keystone Pipeline in 2011 did the opposite. It denied thousands of jobless Americans the chance at high-paying work and blocked a direct connection between refineries in Texas and affordable energy in Canada. But what's more audacious about the President's economically indefensible action is the fact that it is groundless. The President's own State Department concluded, quote, no significant, end quote, environmental damage would be caused by Keystone's completion. The Keystone Pipeline has jobs to offer. Why is the President turning those jobs away?
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 870 days since I arrived in Congress, and the Republican leadership has still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. Mr. Speaker, this is not an exaggeration to say that unemployment is a matter of life and death. In a new study, researchers at Oxford and Stanford found that approximately 4,750 suicides in the United States between 2007 and 2010 were attributed to unemployment. Now here in America, the sequester is slated to cut billions to nutrition subsidies, medical research, cancer clinics, low-income heating, and other life-saving services. If we continue to cut jobs because of the sequester, Mr. Speaker, the facts are clear. The sequester kills. Mr. Speaker, it's time to bring H.R. 900, the Cancel the Sequester Act, to the floor for a vote. It is time to turn our attention back to jobs.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Americans Jobs Act. Our mantra, Mr. Speaker, should be
the gentlewoman's time has expired.
Jobs.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, our economy continues to struggle with nearly 12 million of our fellow Americans remaining out of work. Why then does the President still insist on standing in the way of creating new jobs by expanding America's energy sector by using all of our valuable resources, water, wind, solar, gas, and oil? More American energy production would create jobs and grow our economy. in addition to lowering energy costs for hardworking Americans and strengthen our national security. These are the kind of goals that all Americans, Republican and Democrat, should be able to get behind. But this president is clearly not serious about creating new jobs. He still has refused to approve the Keystone Pipeline, which would create 20,000 new jobs in America right away. It's been over 1,700 days. We've waited long enough. It's time to build the pipeline. It's time to create jobs.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on May 21, 2013 at 9:45 a.m. that the Senate passed Senate 309. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on the motion to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Any record vote on the postponed question will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1412 as amended.
The clerk will report on the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 39, H.R. 1412, a bill to improve and increase the availability of on-job training and apprenticeship programs carried out by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 1412 as amended is another product of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs' work to improve the effectiveness of GI Bill benefits for veterans. I want to express my appreciation to the subcommittee chairman, Bill Flores, and ranking member, Mark Takano, and our new full committee ranking member, Mike Michaud, for working with us to bring this amended bill to the full House. In general, H.R. 1412 as amended responds to concerns about how to ensure that veterans make the best use of their hard-earned GI Bill benefits. Specifically, H.R. 1412 improves the GI Bill's on-the-job training option that offers veterans the opportunity to gain work experience and at the same time offers employers a lower cost while the veteran undergoes their training. The bill as amended has two major sections. Section 2 would reduce the final required training salary of a veteran engaged with an employer's on-the-job training apprenticeship program from the current 85% of the fully trained wage for the job to 75%. This new requirement would be put in place for a period of 4 years following the effective date of this section. The temporary decrease in the wage requirement will provide more employers the flexibility to offer OJT programs when they otherwise would not have been able to do so. Section 3 would direct the Department of Veterans Affairs to conclude agreements with other federal agencies to have them to further participate in the OJT program. If we're going to ask private employers to offer more opportunities to our veterans, the federal government ought to lead by example. Mr. Speaker, this bill is another step in reducing the unemployment rate among our veterans and is fully paid for. I greatly appreciate the bipartisan manner in which our colleagues have worked to reach an accord on the final provisions of this bill, and I encourage all members to support the bill and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank the chairman for the full committee for all his hard work and working in a bipartisan manner, not only on this piece of legislation, but all the bills that we've been dealing with in the committee of this Congress. I rise today in support of H.R. 1412 as amended, the Improving Job Opportunity for Veterans Act of 2013. I want to thank Mr. Kaufman for introducing this legislation. I also want to thank Committee Chairman Miller and Subcommittee Chairman Mr. Flores and Ranking Member Mr. Takano for their leadership in assisting in bringing this bill before us today. In these challenging employment markets, we need to use all available means to assist our veterans in obtaining the training that they need to find a good-paying job. H.R. 1412 assists veterans by improving and increasing the VA's on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs. In these programs, a veteran employee's salary is paid in part by the employer and in part by VA, with not less than 50% being paid by the program. As a veteran completes the apprenticeship and becomes a fully qualified employee, the employer pays an increasing percentage of the salary, eventually assuming all of it. H.R. 1412 reduces slightly the percentage of the salary the employer pays near the end of the training program. This eases the burden on the employers and an incentive to employers to increase the number of veterans in the program. The Veterans Committee will be closely monitoring this program to ensure that more veterans are being offered training opportunities as a result. Mr. Speaker, we know that on-the-job training and apprenticeship is a highly efficient and cost-effective means of connecting veterans with meaningful long-term employment. This is good for both veterans and employers. H.R. 1412 enhances the opportunity for both making it easier for companies to employ veterans and for veterans to find new jobs and careers. Unfortunately, however, not too many employees know about this program and how to connect it. As we pass this legislation, I encourage the VA to do more to inform employers and veterans about the benefits of this program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maine reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'm pleased to yield as much time as he might consume the author of the bill and a stalwart supporter of America's veterans, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to thank Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Michaud for their leadership on the committee. Their efforts to advance this important bill will help veterans who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan find jobs. As a member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and as a Marine Corps combat veteran myself, it's important to me and to our country that we take care of those who have served this nation after they come home from war. Our veterans have great skills when it comes to working as a member of a team and getting the job done, but unfortunately, in many instances, their technical skills aren't readily transferable to civilian occupations. The Bureau of Labor Statistics stated that the unemployment rate for Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans between the ages of 20 and 24 was 19% in April. This is why I'm happy to have my legislation, H.R. 1412, the Improving Job Opportunities for Veterans Act of 2013. I'm happy that it is on the floor today for a vote. This legislation seeks to increase the availability of on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs to help veterans make the transition into the civilian workforce. This legislation will build on an existing yet little known and underutilized on-the-job training program that allows veterans to use their educational benefits that they earn through their military service to learn a trade or a skill by participating in an approved apprenticeship or on-the-job training program. There are two pillars of this legislation. The first is that it will decrease the final percentage of the veteran's salary paid by the employer from 85% to 75% as a means to further incentivize employers to participate. Secondly, the legislation will expand this training program by requiring the VA to enter into agreements with other federal agencies to expand on-the-job training opportunities throughout the federal government. This legislation will be a great tool for both private sector and federal employers to hire our veterans who are struggling to make that transition from the military to the civilian workforce. Employers in Colorado have already explained to me how beneficial this legislation can be for their operations because they know that hiring veterans is a proven bonus. They know that veterans are hardworking, team-oriented, and are quick learners who are capable of gaining highly technical skills that are prevalent in many industries today. For example, the CEO of Tri-State Generation in Colorado, based in my home district, told me that the Improving Job Opportunities for Veterans Act will add to his company's existing outreach to our veterans. Currently, they employ 150 veterans now and want to do even more. I applaud their efforts and of other companies who want to hire vets. I hope this bill helps veterans connect to a great pool. I hope that it helps employers connect to a great pool of talent from those returning from military service. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida reserves.
Mr. Speaker, reserve.
The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from California, Mr. Tencano.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Maine for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support the increased job opportunities embodied in H.R. 1412 and the changes it makes to the on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I want to thank Mr. Kaufman, the gentleman from Colorado, for introducing this bill, and the Veterans Committee leadership, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Michaud, and Subcommittee Chairman Flores for moving this bill through committee. This legislation will expand access for veterans to on-the-job training and apprenticeships and assist employers in hiring veterans who have shown time and again that their real-world experience, leadership, and countless other skills are great resources for America's companies. By reducing the percentage of salary paid by an employer to a veteran participating in one of these programs, this bill would make it more attractive for companies to hire veterans doing on-the-job training and apprenticeships. It is our hope that these opportunities will help bridge some the employment gaps veterans are currently experiencing. Unfortunately, it is also clear from our subcommittee work that the Department of Veterans Affairs could be doing a better job advertising this great benefit. The more veterans and employers know about this benefit, the more opportunities veterans can have in the job market. Mr. Kaufman's bill also requires the VA to carry out a public relations campaign that would raise awareness of these valuable programs. I am proud to support this legislation and urge my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to support it as well. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud of the bipartisan spirit of the Veterans Committee. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maine reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more speakers at this time, so if Mr. Michaud is ready to close, we'll be prepared to close.
The gentleman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, have no further members who wish to speak, but I do want to, in closing, emphasize again that the veterans are an asset to any organization, whether in the private or public sector. They make the organization better, and they improve the bottom line. This bill is very timely and is very important for our veterans. I also want to thank, once again, Mr. Tencano for his leadership on this issue and his life before he became a member of Congress. He was in the community college system, and he knows about training and how important apprenticeship programs are. So I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maine yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, encourage all members to support H.R. 1412 as amended, and I yield back the balance of my time as well.
The gentleman from Florida yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1412 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being
Mr.
in the
Speaker,
affirmative. The gentleman from Florida.
On that, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. After a sufficient number has risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
We're going to manage one more bill.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I now move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 570 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 570, a bill to amend Title 38, United States Code, to provide for annual cost of living adjustments to be made automatically by law each year in the rates of disability compensation for veterans with service-connected disabilities and the rates of dependency and indemnity compensation for survivors of certain service-connected disabled veterans.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material that they may have on H.R. 570 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
The author of the underlying bill, Mr. Runyon of New Jersey, has put forward a bipartisan proposal to make permanent the Veterans Cost of Living Adjustment. Currently, Congress must adopt annual COLA bills to ensure that payments to disabled veterans and survivors do not erode due to inflation. Mr. Runyon's bill, which my amendment incorporates, would make this annual and sometimes dangerously delayed practice a thing of the past. A coalition of veterans groups expressed strong concern with some other elements of the underlying bill which my amendment now seeks to address. First, the concern was expressed that the bill would permanently extend the 20-year practice of rounding veterans' COLA increases down to the next lower whole dollar. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that by extending the round-down authority saves relative to the baseline over $1.3 billion over a 10-year period. The Veterans Coalition was concerned about the cumulative effect that the permanent round-down would have, as well as the moral principle associated with logging savings on the backs of our disabled veterans. To meet that concern, I worked with our ranking member to first sunset the round-down authority after 5 years, and second, we agreed to the committee's markup to find a way to reinvest savings associated with the round-down by improving benefits for other disabled veterans. I'm pleased to announce that my amendment contains such an improvement that it is now enthusiastically supported by the veterans groups. Our bipartisan work would significantly increase the special monthly compensation payments made to our most severely disabled veterans by 30% through the year 2018, then 50% thereafter. This is a payment that goes to support catastrophically disabled veterans who are in need of aid and attendance. These are veterans who are missing limbs, totally blind, deaf, or who are so disabled that they require the need of special care in the home, all as a result of their military service. Clearly, it's our duty to ensure that these most deserving service-disabled veterans are well cared for, and my amendment to H.R. 570 will be a significant step in that direction. And finally, the service organizations were concerned about the potential application of the so-called chain CPI at some point in the future that could potentially affect veterans' COLAs. To allay that concern, my amendment specifies that the only permanent veterans' COLA only would be continued to the extent that the current inflationary index that is used now. The CPI for urban wage earners and clerical workers continues in force. I'm very pleased to say that with the changes in my amendment, we now have a bill that can be supported by the veterans it is intended to benefit. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 570 as amended, the American Heroes COLA Act. I wish to thank Mr. Runyon, the sponsor of H.R. 570, and the chairman of the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee, as well as Ms. Titus, our subcommittee ranking member, for their hard work on this measure. I'd also like to thank Chairman Miller for working closely with me and with the veterans groups to make this key improvements in this particular bill. H.R. 570 would permanently index the annual Veterans Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA, to the increase provided to Social Security beneficiaries permanent, but only if the Social Security COLA continues to be determined using the current methodologies. This guards against automatically passing on any decrease to veterans that results from any future actions to implement a changed CPI regime. Second, H.R. 570 extends a COLA round-down provision set to expire this year for 5 years instead of making it permanent. This round-down provision was implemented many years ago as a means of budget savings, and many veteran groups voiced opposition to making such increase permanent. Third, the savings generated from the round-down extension will be reinvested in veterans programs, namely increasing the monthly amount provided to some of our veterans most in need of assistance and care. H.R. 570 would increase the amount of what is called a special monthly compensation paid to catastrophically disabled veterans in need of aid and attendance. This monthly amount would be increased from $2,002 to $3,163 and $2,983 for those most in need of care to $4,713. These final payments would be phased in to comply with pay-go requirements. H.R. 570, as amended, is a good bill, and I urge my colleagues to support this measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maine reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I am happy to yield such time as he might consume to the chairman of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Runyon.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Chairman Miller, thank you, and Ranking Member Mr. Michaud for bringing this bill to the floor. H.R. 570 is American Heroes COLA Act. This bill, which I introduced at the beginning of the 113th Congress, seeks to make permanent the annual increase to veterans' disability compensation rates and other benefits by tying these increases to the cost of living adjustments for Social Security benefits. With the passage of this act, veterans will no longer again have to depend on congressional action to receive an increase to the cost of living adjustment they have more than earned through their service. Instead, these increases will become automatic from year to year. As chairman of the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, I am honored again to sponsor this legislation. I am proud to have our subcommittee ranking member, Ms. Titus, as the co-lead sponsor of the bill. Mr. Speaker, I also support the amendment offered by Chairman Miller of the Committee of Veterans Affairs to use the savings generated by H.R. 570 to increase the rate of special monthly compensation paid to our most tragically wounded veterans. And I encourage all members to support H.R. 570. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
The gentlewoman from Nevada is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ranking Member Michaud, for yielding and for your work and leadership on this critical issue that affects our nation's heroes. I support the American Heroes COLA Act, H.R. 570, which I introduced along with my colleague and subcommittee chairman, John Runyon. This is important legislation that will protect our disabled veterans and their families' financial security. Unlike with Social Security COLA increases, which are calculated automatically, Congress must act each year to provide veterans with the COLA increases they need and deserve. Our nation's heroes should receive their full compensation payment each year as well in a timely fashion, removed from the occasional logjam here on Capitol Hill. Their livelihood should not be held hostage by political forces. Nevada's veterans have struggled during this tough economic climate. Their rates of unemployment and homelessness are disproportionately high, and as the cost of living has increased, so have their problems. And I know this is true of veterans around the country. By permanently adjusting benefits to include automatic cost of living increases, we are providing critical peace of mind to those who have bravely served our country. They will have the knowledge of knowing that assistance will be there. Chairman Runyon and I have worked closely to improve this legislation since we first introduced the bill in February, and I fully support the amended version we're considering today. Changes concerning the round-down practice and the changed CPI are changes that will strengthen the bill. I appreciate also the input we received from a number of veteran service organizations and believe that this improved version of the legislation clearly addresses their concerns. In effect, H.R. 570 will direct the VA to increase rates of disability compensation for veterans with service-connected disabilities, as well as the rates of dependency and indemnity compensation for the survivors of veterans with specific service-connected claims. The bill will protect veterans' benefits from deteriorating over time as the costs of housing, medicine, food, and clothing and utilities all increase. I want to echo Ranking Member Michaud's sentiments regarding the importance of having these adjustments occur annually, regularly, and dependably. It's essential that Congress provides for the needs of our heroes, the brave men and women who answered the call to serve in our armed services, and for their families as well. I thank Chairman Miller and Chairman Runyon for their work on this important issue, and I urge my colleagues to support the American Heroes COLA Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Maine reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
We'll reserve our time. I have no further speakers.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. O'Rourke.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would also like to thank the chair of the subcommittee and the ranking member for sponsoring this legislation, and the chairman and ranking member of the full committee for bringing it forward. I'm